Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Julie Tai. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters and the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. Thank you for joining us this morning at the American Institute of Architects for this important discussion on the proposed City of Yes for carbon neutrality zoning amendment. We are really happy to welcome you here today on this glorious spring morning. I'm really glad it wasn't very polleny on my bike ride here. We have a terrific group of panelists to discuss an issue of great importance for the future of our city. As they stand today, New York City's zoning regulations are a barrier to making the necessary green investments that are crucial in our fight against climate change and reducing toxic air pollution. However, a few weeks ago, a groundbreaking step was taken as the public review process began for the City of Yes carbon neutrality zoning proposal. This proposal represents a significant opportunity for our city and our state to achieve their climate goals. It aims to remove outdated zoning restrictions that have limited the installations of essential infrastructure, such as rooftop solar panels, battery energy storage systems, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and energy-efficient building facade retrofits, which we all know is so key to complying with Local Law 97. I swear there's never been a law that I've known by number as well as I do Local Law 97. In the state, we don't call bills that way. We believe that adopting the City of Yes proposal will not only accelerate the transition to a carbon neutral future, but also promote a healthier and more sustainable New York City for all of its residents. That's why it's one of our top priorities in 2023. We're honored to have an exceptional lineup of speakers who will share their expertise and insights on the City of Yes proposal. First, we're fortunate to have Dan Garodnick, Director of the New York City Department of City Planning and Chair of the City Planning Commission, with us to provide an overview of the Planning Commission's vision for the City of Yes for carbon neutrality zoning proposal. Following Dan's presentation, we'll have 4 distinguished panelists joining to give us their expert perspectives. We have Rit Agarwala, who is the city's Chief Climate Officer and Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. He's going to talk about the city and state's emissions targets and how the new zoning proposal aligns with how we're going to meet those goals. Suzanne DeRoche, who's Vice President of Clean and Resilient Buildings at NYC, who is going to offer us insights on the state's framework and funding opportunities that might be unlocked by having this proposal move forward. We're fortunate to have Annie Carforo, the Climate Justice Campaigns Manager at We Act for Environmental Justice. Annie is going to provide a critical perspective on how the City of Yes proposal and other city initiatives can advance environmental justice. And last but not least, we have John Mandyke, who is CEO of the Urban Green Council, who will share his expertise and talk about the role that this proposal will play in the practitioner community and how that will help us advance our climate goals. We have a lot to cover, and we're going to keep things moving quite along. After our panelists speak, we'll have time for audience questions, so please keep that in mind throughout the program. I want to express my gratitude again to all of you for being here today, and of course to AIA for hosting us in this beautiful facility. We know that together we can create a city that embraces green innovation, reduces our carbon footprint, and enhances the quality of life for our residents. Now, please join me in welcoming Dan Garodnick to provide us with an overview of the City of Yes for carbon neutrality zoning proposal.
Thank you, Julie. And good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. I am really happy to be here with the League of Conservation Voters to talk about this new initiative that is now underway. Let me see here. Okay, good. The technology is working, so I can kick it off. So this proposal that Julie mentioned, the City of Yes for carbon neutrality proposal, is the first of 3 citywide text amendments that are being advanced by the Adams administration. The next up, and you can see them on the screen here, are for economic opportunity, to make it easier to start or grow a business in New York City, and then for housing opportunity, to help create affordable housing in every neighborhood in New York. And you can see the rough timeline of each of these. Carbon neutrality is the first. We had done the most stakeholder engagement on this one, and it had the least amount of environmental review for this proposal, so we were able to move it first. Second will be economic opportunity, which will go into public review in the fall. and the third for housing opportunity, which requires the most environmental review to be able to get it done. I want to thank all of our partners who have been part of this proposal as it's been in development. We're really grateful for the support of our partners in city and state government, We Act, Urban Green, and of course our hosts at LCV, Julie. I will note my partner in government, Rit Agarwal, who you're going to hear from in a moment, who is the DEP commissioner and the chief climate officer and chief of everything related to sustainability. He just laid out the next Plan NYC with many of you all. He was the architect of the first one. I have not yet asked him which one was his favorite, but that's for a day over drinks. But he is a great advocate. And for those of you who have already shared letters of support for this proposal, for the text amendment, they're up on our website at nyc.gov. Yes, carbon neutrality / yes, carbon neutrality. And this is a proposal that needs to get passed by the City Council. So we need 26 votes to pass this proposal. So we are asking for your support of this proposal. And if you're inclined to write a letter of support and allow us to share it publicly, we would be beyond grateful for that opportunity. Okay, now on this proposal, as Julie mentioned a second ago, this was referred to public review on April 24th, which was the Monday after Earth Day. We are currently in that 60-day review period for community boards and borough presidents who will have a chance to weigh in with recommendations. After that, there will be a public hearing at the City Planning Commission, and we expect that it will come for a vote before the City Planning Commission in August. Then it goes to the City Council, 50 days there, and a vote we expect in October. So this is all coming relatively soon, considering that we are basically in almost in June at this point. So October is right around the corner. What we've learned, and Julie noted this a moment ago, we're trying to take aim at those provisions in zoning which are inhibiting our ability to make good choices in New York City, and frankly, to make the choices that local law 97 and other laws are requiring us to make in New York City. So this proposal is meant to help us achieve 4 critically important goals: decarbonizing our city's energy, our buildings, our transportation, and our water, compost, and recycling. I want to talk about each of these goals briefly, and then I'm just going to pull out a few examples, but I'm not going to go through all 17 in the interest of keeping things moving today. But obviously, we are available to any of you for a detailed review on the subject of any of the individual proposals or on any of the big picture questions. So first, on decarbonizing the energy grid, this is fundamental to addressing the climate crisis, and it underpins everything else that we do. To achieve our goals, we need to build a lot more solar and also to allow for distributed energy storage systems around the city that will allow us to move away from dirty fossil fuels and peaker plants that will help us deliver a cleaner grid in New York City. Our second goal here is to decarbonize our building stock. It's well known to you, the impacts of our buildings on our local environment. You are certainly familiar with this effort, especially thanks to New York's landmark Local Law 97, which we've talked about already this morning. With City of Yes, we are going to make sure that zoning is not a barrier to making building improvements to clean up our buildings. We're going to talk about that in a second. And I know that our panelists will have much, much more to say about this goal. The next, we need to decarbonize our transportation. One of the great things about New York City is that so many New Yorkers are already moving around the city on mass transit or by biking or walking. But for lots of people who need to make a shift from gas to electric vehicles, charging is a huge barrier to adoption here, and we need to fix that. So another goal for us Goal 3 here is decarbonizing our vehicles. Goal 4 is decarbonizing our water, recycling, and compost. You all may not be surprised to learn that the words recycling, compost, neither of them appear in our zoning resolution even once, which creates real ambiguity for people when they're looking to set up new systems, something that we really need to clarify. So we need to make it easier for New Yorkers to take these simple steps. So the proposal here, and this is the broad overview, and I forgot to mention at the top that this proposal was put together by a really, really impressive team at the Department of City Planning. And I want to just note that our team leader on this, Nilas Klingel, is here. Where's Nilas? Oh, he's way in the back. He's way in the back. But Nilas has pulled this all together over many, many months and beyond. Also here is the Executive Director of City Planning, Edith Sue Chen, and from our Community Engagement Division, Lara Merida and Jasmine Tipale, who have done a great job in helping us talk about these complicated topics and try to bring life to 17 very, very detailed proposals. And as you can see here, it's a broad-ranging initiative to fix a lot of our zoning for our climate goals. And I am not going to go through every one of the 17, but you can see them here. And I would encourage you to reach out to any of the members of our team if you want to hear or learn more. So let's go into a couple of examples to illustrate what we're actually talking about here. So this is one of our 17 proposals as it relates to solar on building rooftops. And as many of you already know, our zoning currently limits the amount of rooftop that you can use for solar panels with buildings. And so that limits everything. It limits how much energy can be produced and sets us back from fully electrifying our systems, our grid, our buildings. City of Yes would lift these limits so that we can maximize how much clean energy that we can produce. And it might look something more like that. I'm going to go back so you can see it. It changed from that to that. And the rules are you can't do more than 25% of your rooftop today. If you're elevating your solar panels like this, they have to be 9 feet high for the fire department, but zoning rules say they can't be more than 6 feet high. So there's lots of limitations that exist out there. We need to fix those. Another proposal here, solar canopies over parking areas. This feels like a real no-brainer. Installing solar panels over open parking lots is a win-win. But today, arcane rules about permitted obstructions limit where you can actually do this sort of thing. We estimate that 8,500 acres of parking lots could be covered with solar canopies. 8,500, it's a lot. And if all of those solar panels were built, it could generate enough energy to power 130,000 homes. So, that alone is more than half of New York City's solar goal. We don't expect us to change the zoning to have things, materialize in an instant. But boy, are we in the way if we have rules that do not enable this to take place. So we want to deal with that. Next, on buildings, a change that we're making to facilitate high-performance retrofits. As you likely know, under our zoning, part of wall thickness counts toward floor area. So what that means is if you're already built out to your maximum envelope under zoning, and you want to do something that creates a more energy-efficient building, you can't. You can't. Now, I've been around city government long enough to know that rules are there for a reason, and sometimes you create rules that have unintended consequences. This is one of those. The fact that we are making it impossible for people who want to make good decisions, or in the case of complying with law, need to make good decisions, and we're in their way, Government here needs to be a help, not a hindrance, so we are going to fix this. We estimate that there are about 50,000 buildings that are at or over their allowed floor area, which would now be able to make these sorts of changes. Last example that I wanted to cite today is on facilitating electric vehicle charging. Because of the way that EV charging is characterized today, it's only legal in about half of the city's commercial zones. Only half today. So with this proposal, we will update our use groups so that it is legal in all of our C zones. So you can see here, the proposal C1, 4, 5, and 7. It's currently allowed in 2, 6, and 8. All M districts, it's allowed. So we are going to dramatically increase the amount of space which is available for EV charging in New York City, particularly in commercial districts. So that's my overview. There's obviously a lot more detail to this one, but we're really excited that we are able, as an early initiative of this administration, in partnership with the League of Conservation Voters and so many of you, to be able to advance a really meaningful environmental program that we believe will have a direct impact on the ability of New Yorkers to make good choices for the environment, and also for government to be an assist, not an obstacle. So we're really, really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all the panelists about their thoughts on how we should be solving our climate crisis issues, and certainly thanks to all of you for your participation today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for that. There's a lot going on, and it is always important that government not be in the way, right? We know this isn't going to solve all the problems for climate crisis, if only it were that easy, right, Brent? But we know we need to make sure that we're moving things forward and making it easier for people so they don't have as many excuses. So we're looking forward to the weeks and the months ahead, how we can help ensure New Yorkers understand what's happening in the proposal, because I know zoning is something that most people aren't talking about at the dinner table, except in probably your house. I know, it's shocking. I know. So people can understand that. This is not something that's going to make it happen. It's going to be something that facilitates things happening to achieve our goals in climate, and also how it's going to impact individually, which is a perfect segue to our panel discussion. And we're going to start with Rit, who's going to give us an overview of environmental initiatives and frameworks to contextualize the City of Yes proposal. So Rit, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Julie, as always, for having me. I think what City of Yes demonstrates is a couple of things that I think are really important. The first is actually how this administration, building on the work of the previous two, and Mayor Adams is always quick to recognize that, particularly on climate, but on so many things we do, we stand on the work that Mayor Bloomberg and Mayor de Blasio did. But one of the things that is, as Dan pointed out, I took, as some of you know, I took a good 12 years out of government. And one of the key contrasts for me between the way climate worked 12 years ago when I left and the way climate works now is that now it really is an all-of-government effort. So then, we were using the Sustainability Office to generate ideas and convince agencies to work on them. And today, we have sustainability leads, including a great one over here, in 20 or more than 20 of our city agencies. One of the most important things I do on my daily or weekly agenda is every 2 weeks I chair a meeting of the climate leads across city government. And we talk about things that are not being generated necessarily out of the Sustainability Office, but are coming out of the agencies as they understand their role in the overall climate fight. And City of Yes is a great example of that. I think the other thing I'll point out is that City of Yes demonstrates to me, or typifies, or epitomizes to me, the overall approach of the Adams administration to being really pragmatic about what it's going to take to get action, not focus on making more big plans or more big goals until we've figured out how we're actually going to make progress on the goals that we have established, and ensuring that we are working always on making it as easy as possible for New Yorkers and businesses in New York to do the right thing. Julie, you made the point that Local Law 97 has branded itself by its number, almost uniquely. You know, I remember actually when Dan was a sponsor of one of the bills in the Greener Greater Buildings Plan, I still don't remember what those bill numbers wound up being. I know it was 84, 85, 88, I don't know. But somehow this one has been eaten by its number, which I think is a terrible catastrophe, because it means we've lost sight of its actual title, right? The title of Local Law 97 was the Climate Mobilization Act. And I can't help but think that we've got to go back to what that term means. If you think about what mobilization involves, right? What do? You mobilize an army, you mobilize a community, you mobilize a team, right? You don't pass a law and levy fines. That's not mobilization, right? Mobilization involves figuring out at sometimes painful levels of detail what it's going to take to get a whole bunch of people to move, perhaps contrary to their inclinations, but nonetheless to move all in the same direction. They're all going to have unique challenges. It's going to require everybody involved, including government, to get out of their comfort zone. And this is a good example of the kind of thing it's going to take. It is going to require us to think creatively about how we write the rules that will govern how Local Law 97 is implemented. It's going to require us to be thoughtful about how we use the power of fines, critical to the whole thing. We cannot walk away from the stick in this equation, but we have to be thoughtful about how we levy the threat of fines on buildings and prompt them to mobilization. And we have to be thoughtful about how we clear away the impediments to action. And that's what I think is so great about what Dan and Edith and the team at DCP have done, where they've thoughtfully gone through, and both DEP and MOCEJ, of course, were deeply involved, as were several other city agencies, in advising city planning on where there were opportunities. And I'm particularly, as wearing my DEP hat, really happy that the permeable pavement makes it into your slides, so thank you for that. But again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to view this as an example of an overall philosophy, that this is about rolling up our sleeves, and as the mayor personally wanted to subtitle the latest version of Plan NYC, this is about getting sustainability done. Now, I said I would give a couple of other things that we're doing, because City of Yes is not the only thing we are doing, but it is a critical component. Obviously, we have the overall implementation plan for Local Law 97 that is perhaps top of mind for many in the building sector. We are working on the rulemaking for the, probably in some ways, the most important aspect of the rulemaking for that. You should see that over the summer. That will be the rules around the enforcement, indicating how we are going to make use of the good faith effort clause in the law, how we are going to think about levying fines, what the adjudication process will be, things like that. We are also working very much on a new set of approaches to how we help buildings do the financing and perhaps the funding that is necessary to achieve the 2030 goals. Because I also need to remind everybody, Local Law 97 is a two-step process. 2024, it starts. But the real game is about 2030. That's the difficult task. That's the big task. That's what really matters. And so we've got to keep our eyes on the real prize there. But look, buildings and building emissions are not the only thing we're working on. In part, as Dan alluded to, we have a broad approach to how we think about vehicle electrification. Of course, we're a transit, pedestrian, and bike-first city, and we're going to continue that. But we do have to make sure that the vehicles in New York City electrify. We're particularly concerned about how we do that around trucks, because we know that trucks are actually the vehicles that not only cause carbon emissions, but they cause the air quality issues that are particularly concentrated in EJ neighborhoods. And one of my favorite initiatives in Plan NYC, not that I have favorites, of course, but one of my favorite, is actually the city's interest or commitment to work towards a low emission zone, like London has embraced, and focus that on environmental justice communities where so many of these truck hubs are based. That's one of the things that, just to be honest, we don't quite know how we're going to do it. The legal path is a little bit unclear, but we are going to make every effort we can because we think that's the right answer for New Yorkers. I won't go into more. There are 70 of them. We're talking about resilience. We're talking about air quality. We've got ambitious plans for water quality, but those are a couple that I think are worth noting this morning. So thank you.
Thanks, Rit. And I think $120 million from congestion pricing is going to help with some of that. So we have a lot going on there, and I think, Rit, you touched on this really nicely. Like, we have far too often, I think, not paid enough attention to where things are sited relative to communities, right? And that has resulted in environmental racism. And so, Annie, how do you think that the City of Yes proposal is going to impact, and other city initiatives, right, is going to advance environmental justice that is so righteously deserved?
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. My name is Annie. I'm the Climate Justice Campaign Manager with We Act. And I think that everybody on this panel can agree that there is a legacy of environmental and racism that still exists in this city and that we need to take actions to undo. There's been, due to land use decisions in the past, there's been a concentration of polluting facilities in communities of color and low-income communities, ranging from bus depots to highways to sanitation infrastructure to power plants. And meanwhile, an underinvestment in community resources like housing, green space, tree canopy. And so the results of that are that we have communities of color who are exposed to higher rates of air pollution. They're more vulnerable to extreme weather events, either that be extreme heat or flooding. And they're also living in housing that is less efficient. They have higher energy burdens. And all of this stress leads to an increase in chronic health problems. And so at We Act, we're a community organization that is committed to improving the health of our communities and rectifying these environmental harms. And so we're very excited by proposals that are aiming to do just that. So for City of Yes, there are a lot of pieces of this proposal that we're very excited about. I don't want to go into all of them because there are a lot, but I think highlighting a couple important ones for We Act is definitely worthwhile. The expansion of solar, wind, and energy storage in buildings, that's going to be really important for, as we said, decentralizing our grid, but also creating green jobs. We Act in 2019 helped facilitate the creation of the Solar Uptown Now Services, which is the first minority-owned solar cooperative that was installing on HDFC's affordable housing across the city. And the expansion, the ability to build on solar on rooftops from 25% to 100% creates a lot of opportunities for jobs in the city for companies like Suns. And so we see that as an exciting opportunity also for buildings that maybe at first didn't see the financial feasibility of building solar or didn't have the ability to do so under current zoning restrictions. We also know that decarbonizing our buildings is going to be incredibly difficult, especially existing buildings. And we're going to need access to every tool in our toolbox. And so City of Yes is removing a lot of the red tape that exists right now. The ability to expand wall thickness, that is really helpful for existing buildings that, as was mentioned, might be capped out of their FAR and can't do some of these insulation improvements. Also, opening up opportunities to put heat pumps, other, clean energy storage or equipment on roofs and backyard space. Again, it's just providing flexibility where there originally was not any. And We Act knows firsthand that transitioning buildings from fossil fuel heating and cooling and cooking to all electric has incredible health benefits. We know that when you are using a gas stove inside your house, for example, you're being exposed to incredibly high concentrations of air pollution. And that's a big deal for environmental justice communities that, as we've discussed, are exposed to higher rates of outdoor air pollution and now are also living inside homes that have toxic air. And so we want to facilitate the ability to transition these buildings to clean energy. And there are a lot of pieces of this proposal that are going to make that easier. And again, especially for existing buildings, which are going to be a challenge. I think there's other exciting things, the permeable pavement, but also just including rain gardens as part of the green infrastructure package that new developments or large developments can install in their neighborhoods is exciting. We've seen many times developments go up in neighborhoods like East Harlem, where the developer pays into a fund and forgoes putting a street tree in front of their new building. And that's a disservice to the community where there is extreme flooding, there are more cloudburst events, and they do need some of this infrastructure that can really soak up that excess rain. And so having the ability to include rain gardens as part of that, expanding access to permeable pavement, all of that is going to help just make our city more absorbent. And then last but not least, I do really want to mention we're incredibly excited to see composting included in the zoning text amendments. WEAC's members have been really committed to creating a closed loop, sustainable local green economy when it comes to our food waste. It's also a really great and natural way to help reduce pest exposure. And we have committed to building composting in our communities where we can take that food waste, we can process it, we're creating green jobs, we're engaging youth, and then we're creating soil that can go into our tree beds, can go into our gardens, can really help nourish our community. And so the ability to have compost as an accessory use in residential, as a right in some commercial, that's a really big deal and something that we see a lot of opportunity in. And I know I said that was the last thing I want to mention, but I do just want to say one more thing, that the text amendments are a really important step in the right direction to removing a lot of this red tape that's been mentioned. But without the projects and the programs and the policies by our city government, it's going to be really hard to make sure that these benefits are distributed equitably. And what we fear is that City of Yes will become the City of Yes for those that can afford it, while the communities that are exposed to the disproportionate impacts of climate change and air pollution are not going to be able to receive these benefits. So WEAC definitely looks forward to continuing to work with the city to make sure that these investments are prioritized in environmental justice communities and that those communities can receive the benefits that these amendments unlock.
That's right on. I mean, this is not in a silo, right? We need a lot of different policies in order for us to achieve all these goals and make sure that it's done so equitably. And that's a great segue to our buildings expert and state representative. So Suzanne, can you talk about how this proposal is going to uplift some of those goals in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and what funding opportunities are available for everyday New Yorkers?
Thanks, Julie, and great to be here. So I'm just going to reflect on a couple of things that have already been said. So talking about mobilization, we are in a place, certainly with the passage of the Climate Act at the state law, at the state level, where we have the goal, and now it's law, and now we have to figure out how to get there. As well, retrofits are hard, right? We know this. We're in aging building stock. Lots of our low and moderate income New Yorkers live in substandard building stock. So, you kind of put those two things together on top of needing benefits to go to communities that have been under-resourced for so long, right? So what I see NYSERDA's role in this space is facilitating how do we get there. So we do that in a number of ways, both providing funding, and I'll talk a little bit about what those opportunities are, as well as developing programs that help catalyze that work. There's a lot of buzz about a lot of federal money that's coming our way, right? So first and foremost, $270 billion in tax credits. Get to know what those are, right? Both for your own, yourself, who you serve, the communities that you work in, and the projects that you do, right? So that doesn't funnel through the state. That happens either at your business or at your home, and it's a lot of money, and it's out there now. I will just put a small pitch in. NYSERDA has a great website we just launched. So if you just Google NYSERDA IRA funds, and what it shows you is all the tax credits that are available across all the different technologies, as well as the state tax credits that are for the same technologies, and some of the rebates that are coming, right? So it's sort of a one-stop shop. It is a government website, so it doesn't have like a calculator or anything, but it has all the information that you need in order to get there. So, and in terms of rebates, so right, the IRA money is coming in tax credits and then rebates, and those rebates do come through the state. The two major programs are called HOMES and HERA. Don't ask me to say what those stand for. And the state will be administering somewhere around $317 million between now and 2031. And that'll primarily be for residential upgrades, right? Modernizing these buildings first with an efficiency first lens and then towards electrification. And so on the program side, what we also see is how do we mirror what we're doing to catalyze this work across the state in what can NYSERDA do to both show how it can be done as well as provide seed funding for greater mobilization or scaling. A couple of programs to just mention that might be useful to folks in the room. Empire Building Challenge. This is looking at those really large buildings, right? And going back to City of Yes, when we can increase that insulation and we can change the facade of that building, it's going to be really critical. That's a challenge that 16 major real estate developers in the New York City area have signed on, a number of them to climate neutrality by 2050. So, this is starting to have that knock-on effect where we can show how it works and then developers can move forward and make that happen across their portfolios. The other thing on the residential side, we have low carbon pathways, and this is sort of the place to start, right? So you have this building stock, or you have this old building, we can help you develop a decarbonization plan, and you can get funding for that as well. So there's a number, and I won't go through them because there's many, many NYSERDA programs, but a number of ways that we're really trying to look at what are those steps that buildings needs to take over time in order to get to these goals out in the 2030, 2040, 2050. The last thing I'll talk about is the Bond Act. More funding there, really exciting that passed through the election last year. In terms of buildings, we're focused on schools. We have a program called Clean Green Schools. We had already funded that at about $59 million. Again, in underserved communities, how can we provide technical assistance and funding to get those buildings upgraded, modernized, efficient, and electrified, right? And that's sort of the mantra here. How do we modernize? How do we make these buildings as efficient as possible before we get to electrification so that we're doing all the things we need that electrification to do? It needs to decarbonize, but it needs to also reduce demand on the grid, which City of Yes is helping us do through some of those changes as well. More solar, more storage, more capacity for the equipment to decarbonize helps with all of that packaged together. Other parts of the Bond Act were when we talk about transportation, and I'm looking at Julie, near and dear to your heart, school buses, right? We've got to focus on making these communities and these choices matter to the most vulnerable populations. So there's $500 million there to get our school buses on the pathway to be electric and to be able to charge, right? We got to have both things. It's not easy, not inexpensive, but also City of Yes has a lot of provisions that will help on the consumer side to start that transition. So those are the things that I wanted to mention. I'm sure we'll have other questions later, but thanks everyone.
Thank you so much. And yes, by comparison, the federal government for the entire country has $2.5 billion for electric school buses, and the state of New York is ponying up $500 million thanks to the voters. So it's an interesting comparison. Thank you. We're way ahead of the federal government as far as that goes. Not surprising, as New York should be. So with that, John, how is DCP's efforts supporting the practitioner community, and why is it so important?
Well, thank you to LCV and to DCP for today's event. As I think about the practitioner community, I think it's important just to take a big step back and think about the context of what's happening here, right? Because the biggest, boldest, hardest fought electrification plans won't work unless we pay attention to the smallest, most minute implementing detail. And that's what this is all about. And we heard from Dan this morning on some of that, like if you look at another law by its number, Local Law 154, our all-electric buildings law, when we build new buildings starting next year that have to be all electric, all that equipment needs to go on the roof. And if you want to put solar panels, there isn't room to put it underneath. And that's what City of Yes is looking at. How can we increase the height of solar panels so you can put that electrification equipment there? So Local Law 154 won't work unless we address the zoning on rooftop of buildings. I'll give you another example. Local Law 97, we know will drive electrification in buildings over time. It has to, right? But our zoning laws in many places prohibit us from putting condensing units on the outside of buildings. It just won't happen. We won't electrify unless we address those issues. And so it's these smallest details that we really need to pay attention to. So I want to commend Dan and the DCP and the mayor and Rit for taking this on. You know, the practitioner community is pretty simple. They need clarity, they need certainty, and they need unambiguity. I can't say it. Unambiguous approach to this. And so the clearer we can get in our regulations on this, the more the design community can go do what they do best, which is tell us what the rules are, tell us what the laws are, and we will deliver for you the building that you need or the retrofit that you need. I think what's important in the suite of proposals that's out there right now is, you know, this is will continue to drive energy efficiency in buildings through incentives, which is important. It'll continue to drive building electrification. It'll continue to drive storage that we need, that we've talked about, which is so critical. And it will make, this will be another tool to get us on the road to where we need to be with Local Law 97 and 154. I guess the final thing I'll say is all this is tough. There's no question about it. Like, to do what we're trying to do is enormous. It's tough, but the way I look at it, it is doable. And we can't lose sight of that track, the mobilization part of this. This is doable. We can mobilize to do it. It's tough but doable. And at the end of the day, the climate isn't waiting for us to figure this out. Climate change is going to do what it's doing, whether we figure this out or not. So I guess we have no choice. And so we have to take on these big issues. And I'm glad to see that the city's doing that right now.
I think that's exactly right. Changes are coming. And it's what do we do about it? And we have to take action. And we have to, you know, in this case, I think the city is getting out of the way of addressing many of these issues and how we're going to mobilize and how we're going to achieve these. So really excited about this opportunity. We have time for some audience questions. Can you say your name and your affiliation and who you're directing your question to? Wait, we got a microphone coming.
Hi, my name is Steve Strauss. I guess I'm here wearing two hats. One, I'm a co-op board member in Queens, and the other is I'm executive director of a passenger rail advocacy organization. Commissioner or Chair Gorodnick stepped out, so maybe Rit can answer my question. I'm interested in the on-street electric charging and how the zoning has to change for that. And I don't know if you know if it's in this first package or if it's in the housing package, but that's something that my building and community is going to need.
Alan, I gotta say, I need city planning to.
We have many members here from planning.
Hi, so Nilas Klingel from City Planning. So the tricky thing is that zoning regulates the zoning lot, the private property. And beyond that property line in the right-of-way, the charter mandates that that's not our jurisdiction. So we've been working very closely with the Department of Transportation, who administers all and so we don't have today, but that's absolutely a piece of the puzzle, the on-street charging program that DOT is rolling out.
Will there be opportunities for private, or will it all have to be public? I mean, if someone wanted to put a charging station, you know, on their yard or on the sidewalk in front of their building, is that going to have to be a public charging station, or can it be private, or can it be a franchise of the city?
I think all those options are being explored at the DOT level. On the private side, on the parking lot. Sorry, I'm in the wrong spot. In the actual parking lots and parking garages that serve residential buildings, shopping malls, things like that, we're creating in the zoning program here opportunities for both private charging, so you can of course, always offer EV charging to any of your customers or residents of the buildings, and we're clarifying the zoning to ensure that that's always allowed. There's been a number of textual hiccups over the last 10 years we've become aware of. But as well, and this is sort of a big change from zoning perspective, offer up portions of the parking facility to public charging so that people who are navigating the streets, they don't have a place to charge or park their car on a regular basis, can actually identify available spots in residential or commercial accessory parking facilities, navigate there and park and charge there. So that is a big change that's being offered up.
But Steve,
Great
I guess
question.
if I'm understanding your question, I don't think there's a scenario in which taking a sidewalk space and putting a private charger that would not be available to the public. Like, there are clearly some models that we have in a pilot right now through DOT and that we are likely to expand, where private concessionaires might put or are putting chargers on street parking, but they are still going to be open to public use. They're not going to be able to be dedicated. I see.
We have more questions? Really? All right, all the way in the back. Devin.
Hello, thank you for a really hopeful and, God, I can only say possibly life-saving presentation you've all made. A couple of things. I'm an architect. So we're talking about electrification. We're talking about building insulation, renewable energy. If we electrify, we're going to have an enormous winter peak, potentially. A lot more draw of winter usage for electrification. So why not consider south-facing walls as a place for solar? Let's also think about solar thermal. There's a lot of mixes of technology and design opportunities that all the people in the room here, architects and planners, are going to have a lot to work on. So let's open that up. I'm the chair of the New York City 2030 District. We just completed a 3-year NYSERDA clean heating and cooling project called Heat Cool Smart Brooklyn, and we learned a lot about how multifamily buildings are facing insurmountable challenges to retrofit their buildings. So please, please, please let us work together, city and state. The state has clean energy hubs coming into the state and the city. The city has a separate program of resilience hubs. Please let's work together, coordinate these programs so we can accomplish these goals. Thank you. Oh, there's no question there. Too many questions.
Thank you so much, and agreed. We do need to be all working together, and I think that's why it's so great that we have Suzanne, and NYSERDA was listed as one of the partners with DCP on this initiative, because we do need the state and city to come together. Sometimes it's to write a big check, and sometimes it's to provide resources and innovative thinking, which is what NYSERDA has long done, both write checks and come up with innovation. Right over here. Oh, wait, we're back.
Hey, guys.
Hi.
I'm Jeff Perlman from Bright Power. We're obviously looking forward to helping partner with all of you to implement all this great work with all the money that's available. My question is about how we pay for it. And obviously there's been a lot of conversation about how we pay for this, and you mentioned some of the incentives that are coming. But working with many building owners, we get to the point where it's like, you know, to your point, Rit, we've got a 2025 threshold, a 2030 threshold, 2035 threshold. Meeting 2024, 25, not so hard. 2030, a bit harder. 2035, you really have to do a lot to your building. But today, they have to make a decision. Am I going to replace my boiler? Am I going to electrify my building? And like today, making an economic case for them that electrifying their building, even with all the incentives, is very difficult. We don't have certainty about what future electric prices are going to be. Gas is very cheap. There's lots of people who will replace your boiler, and not so many people who will do the electrification. And so I guess and then you have to deal with Con Ed and upgrading the service and everything else. But that, like, how we overcome that cost barrier to get to the point where we get to the scale where we can do this at scale, is a big challenge for all of us who are trying to do it every day. And I'm curious to get your thoughts about how we can bridge that gap to get to the point where we can actually make this happen at scale in a way that is cost effective at the individual level when building owners have to make that decision building by building by building.
Who wants to start with that? It's a good question.
Sure, I'll start. I mean, yes, and I think, Jeff, there's no question that ultimately what you've just pointed out is the nut to crack, right? And I think part of what we have to wrestle with is the reality that while if you're looking for a 5 or 10 or 20% reduction in carbon emissions or energy consumption, you can usually find that in a set of things that will pay for themselves in a financeable time frame, in a 5-year window or a 7-year window or even a 3-year window. If you're looking to fully electrify or you're looking to get to carbon neutrality, it is often the case that that is not an economic decision, right? It is not going to pay for itself. And so one of the things that I think we, and this is something actually that I've been talking with Suzanne and Doreen Harris at NYCERDA about, I mean, we are going to have to figure out how to help buildings, how to push them to do on their own dime all the things that will pay for themselves, right? And this is part of what I look to when I think about the good faith effort clause in Local Law 97. A building that's saying, oh, I can't do anything because going all the way is going to be impossible. That's not a good faith effort. A good faith effort is doing everything you possibly can and then finding where you cannot do any more and stopping and looking for help, right? That's a good faith effort. So we can't like let the legitimate problem that you pointed out paralyze everybody or become an excuse. But I think that some combination of state money, you know, from the Environmental Bond Act, from the governor's concept of cap and invest, from the PSC through NYCERDA, right? I think the city may need to figure out how to be helpful to that. I'm not authorized to say more than that yet, but you know, I think there's a role for the city to play potentially here, and then I think there is going to be just some cost, and I think this is something I've been saying over and over again. Real estate owners need to realize that this is part of the responsibility of owning a building, right? Nobody says, hey, what's the payback period on my facade inspection, right? What's the payback period on my sprinkler system? No. There's just a moral imperative. It's a legal imperative as well, right? And I think ultimately getting to carbon neutrality is in that realm. We do need to make it as easy as possible. It doesn't mean it's going to be cost-free.
And thanks for taking that first, right? You know, again, I do think this is the hardest nut to crack, and the multifamily space is certainly one of the most challenging, right? Sort of that mid to large multifamily space. So a couple of things that I'll just add to what Rit said. We absolutely need better financing solutions for this, right? As you said, it is going to cost money, and we're going to have to finance it. So I would also offer that there are some work streams happening. So the New York Fed is one of them that's really trying to figure out what are some financing strategies that can potentially be you know, backstopped by the government, by the state, by the feds, and certainly the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that's happening through the EPA, and that's other IRA money that I didn't talk about earlier, is looking at how do we bring down that first cost for the financing in order to provide, you know, a reasonable pathway for financing this. So after you've taken the incentives, you know, after that nut has gotten a little bit smaller, then can we finance that? And can we finance the incremental costs, right? So again, you know, I talk a lot about modernization, right? We have to keep continuing to invest in the buildings. If we only call it decarbonization, I think we do ourselves a big disservice, right? So you are upgrading your building. My co-op just spent $500,000 doing brickwork, right? Like, again, we had to do that. There was no question. So this is sort of a similar thing. We did windows at the same time as an efficiency measure, which was more economical than having somebody come and do the windows separately. So I do think that there is something to the efficiency first, then looking for decarbonization to make sure that we're doing this in a way that can be financed over a longer period of time. And I think that that's really important for practitioners to be thinking about what are those strategies that can be rolled out over a longer period of time. You know, again, I'm not talking specifically about Local Law 97. You know, statewide, I look for programs that can really take that first tranche of efficiency and get that going, and then figure out what are the homes that can electrify without increasing energy cost burden in particular. So mainly it's just, I think that we need a lot more financing.
Jeff, that's a great question. I mean, it's the question on everybody's mind, and I echo everything that Rit and Suzanne just said. I would just offer, sometimes it's hard to think in this context, but there is a price of inaction here. And yes, there's a price of investment, but there is an enormous cost of inaction in front of us. And so this isn't a question about paying. We're going to pay. It's just a question of when we're going to pay and how we're going to pay. And that's the point that we're at. I mean, Rit at Earth Day offered one of the best lines I've heard in a while, and I've been using it and attributing it to you. But, 10 years ago, we read about climate change in thick IPCC reports. Today, we read about it in the morning weather report. I mean, it's here. It's on our doorstep. And so we have to understand what is the price of inaction and then weigh that against what's the cost of investment.
I just want to add one other, piece of this puzzle, and this is also going to be, looking at the city and state to make sure that we're preventing a lot of these costs from getting shifted onto tenants who are already going to have potentially higher energy burdens. Recent studies have shown that over 50% of New York City's households are rent burdened, and so we can't squeeze tenants anymore and expect them to pay for this transition. And that needs to be, part of the conversation as we're thinking about financing.
So it's going to be an interesting endeavor. We have time for one last question. She's had her hand up for a little while.
Hi, my name is Manuela, and I come with Turner & Townsend. First of all, thank you for this presentation. It's very inspirational for me to see so much change being done in New York, of course. And my question comes in terms of how are we getting there? And the path to getting there, of course, it's not stopping and solving all the problems at the same time. But I believe that climate data is a crucial step to getting there. And how are we measuring, benchmarking, making sure that agencies, people, private companies know what to measure, how to measure, in order for us to be able to know if we're actually achieving our goals or doing the right thing throughout as we work through this plan. So that's kind of my question.
Suzanne, you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. Critical point. Absolutely. And certainly in New York City, the benchmarking law was absolutely crucial to moving all of the subsequent policies forward, in particular in the building space. And I think that there are multiple players here that can help with ensuring that we've got appropriate data and that data is made available. So that's both government, it's utilities. I'm looking at my friends from Con Ed that are in the room. We know, and utilities know, how much energy the buildings are using and can utilize that information in order to help make this transition and target where we need to target. And this gets even more important when we look at electrification and how it intersects with the grid, right? So in the building space, we're really cognizant of ensuring that the buildings get more efficient in order to not increase stress on the grid, because we know in the vehicle space, right, we're going to be utilizing that electricity in a different demand pattern. All of that information is really critical for the transition. So I think it's incumbent on both government and the utility space in order to make that a package of information and make that available. So I'll use a couple of examples. There's a EV Ready map on Con Ed's website. We could ask Steve Wimple over there to talk about it. There's a DER, a Distributed Energy Resources map. So these are things that can be made available to provide you with data as to where does this work and where does it work well on the grid. I think we need to get there for building decarbonization, right? We hear a lot about how are these buildings going to stress the grid. The gentleman in the back talked about, well, actually at first they're going to increase demand in the winter, right? So we will end up at some point in likely the 2030s with what we call a dual peaking grid. But we can do, if we're smart about the efficiency side, we can do this with a lot of the existing resources and the new resources that we expect to come online, offshore wind, onshore wind, et cetera. So, there is a smart way to do this, and rightly you're pointing out that that data needs to be transparent, and it needs to be available even down to a consumer level of decision making. So thank you for raising it.
And I do think a lot of that will come from the fact that consumers don't know, right? Like there's certainly been more emphasis, I think, certainly I see it from what I get from Con Ed as my electric and gas provider, right? Of encouraging you to, do your laundry at night, right? Run the dishwasher at night. These are common sense things because there's less load at night because everyone is sleeping and the lights are off. And it is changing the light bulbs, right? But it's so many more things. And one of the things that I know Con Ed is doing is also encouraging people and giving them actual money back when they charge their vehicles at the times that are off-peak, right? So there will be more of that to encourage people to make decisions in the way that they understand best, and that's by giving them money. So I think that's all we have time for today, because I know folks have schedules they need to get to. I'm really proud of the panel that we had today. Give them all a hand. Thank you so much. I want to thank our DPC chair, Dan Gorodnick, obviously to our panelists, Rit Agarwal, Suzanne DeRoche, Annie Carafo, and John Mandyke. We have live streamed this event, so it will be available again. We'll be sharing the link to that video on our NYLCV's YouTube page in the follow-up email in the next day or so. Thank you again to the AIA for hosting us in this beautiful space. This is quite lovely. And finally, to everyone, we want to thank you all for coming today. We're really excited that you were here to learn more about this City of Yes zoning proposal. And we hope we help to get this over the finish line later this year. And of course, if you are not following us, please follow us on Instagram and social media and what have you, or sign up for our website. Thank you so much. Bye.